on the call today, you have James Williams. James is one of our cloud architects and delivery specialist with Crayon. He has about 20 years of experience in IT and a few hundred delivery projects under his belt, so he's going to bring a lot of technical insights. Also, Bethany, you just heard on the call as well, is with us. She's our marketing manager. She will be monitoring the chat window, so you can feel free to drop the questions in there. I see that a few folks have already placed a few notes in there. It's in the window there. We will allow about 15-20 minutes to respond to those questions in the end, so feel free to blast them there. Whatever we cannot respond to, we'll just send an email in the end. So after the webinar, we will send our contact information, the slides, the recording of the webinar, and the Q&A transcript to everyone. What may happen as well is after the webinar, you may also want to request a private presentation for your organization so we can get more granular within the company. If you do want that to happen, just feel free to respond to any of those emails we're going to send you, and we'll be happy to do this. We do this all the time. So what else do we have? I think we're pretty good. So thank you again for joining. What we wanted to do around GDPR is tackle the topic, not so much to review the complexity of the regulation in itself, but more to look into the positive aspect of the directive. So what can I learn from this that has an actual positive impact on my company? So during the next 30 minutes, we will brush on the GDPR directive in itself and also show you the practical hacks to enhance the security and the processes around your IT estate. So once again, if you have questions on the first or the second part of the webinar, please put them in the chat window, and Beth will monitor this. So the agenda looks something like this. We will spend the first 15 minutes reviewing what GDPR is and what it means, and how Microsoft has programmatically prepared its suites of products to be compliant ready. James, in the second part, will then showcase how to deploy a few Microsoft modules quite easily to add layers of security and fine-tune what we're going to look into, which is the data governance. The final piece of the webinar is going to be shorter, and it'll just giving our opinion on what modules are easiest to deploy and what modules will take a little bit of expertise. That'll be our take on the topic. So without further ado, let's get started. And so, what is the General Data Protection Regulation? So it is a European regulation that aims at securing personal data in the digital age. When you think about it, for decades, all companies said they respected data privacy. Today, many companies start saying that they're creating data sets so huge, they call them data lakes. And they do this in order to dive into data science. That's a pun that's intended. This is a very exciting time for the IT world, but as we have seen in the recent events with Facebook, the side effects can cause a lot of damage. So the goal of such regulation is to set guidelines and enforce best practices to basically reduce the risk of data theft and other cyber criminal activities. The ask for companies, any one of our companies, is to be able to prove they can discover personal data within their network and delete them at the request of a client. And this is basically the main goal of this policy. So if we want to focus on the slide for a minute, the bullets up there are the key facts. It comes into effect in less than 2 months. It concerns European citizens. It does not concern companies below 250 employees unless their business model is really to deal with European data. In this case, they would be touched by this. Also, it is structured around 4 pillars. How do you discover your data? How do you manage it? How do you protect it? And how can you report on it? So this is the framework, the 4 pillars. and it is extremely important. We will get back to it in a few minutes. Question that everybody should ask at this point is like, why should I care? Why should I care about a European deregulation? And the short answer is the US government is preparing a similar regulation that will come in effect soon in the US. So we'll have our own flavor GDPR, if you will. So by doing this, we're now paving the way when that regulation comes. The longer answer, if we want to look into the immediate situation, is if we're doing business with European clients or European citizens, we should look into being able to comply, because then we'll be directly impacted. Now, a lot of business we have worked with told us the following: we do not do business with Europe. And that is fine, but you have to make sure that Europe is not doing business with you. And to illustrate this, I have a few examples in mind that would have you have any company fall under GDPR regulation immediately. Think about any hospital in any major US city. How many files do they have on European tourists that had to go to the ER for whatever reason? It's probably a ton. In this case, those guys would have to be GDPR compliant. Think about Amazon USA. You know, you buy some random items on there. When I was back in France, sometimes I would just go on the Amazon USA website because there was something I couldn't find in the Amazon France. And so I would give them my credit card information, my contact information, and buy something from there. They would have it shipped to France. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who did that. And this is true for any merchant site, right? Last but not the least, think about the hundreds of thousands of tourists, visa and green card holders that live in the US and give their personal data to US companies to get insurance, to get so and so and everything else. All those folks basically make those companies liable for GDPR. And so at this point, they also would have to at least look into it. And so I'll give you a last example, but as a French citizen, I'm living example. I'm hired by Crayon USA, and therefore Crayon USA has to be GDPR compliant. Fortunately for us, we've been starting this process 20 months ago, and the entire group is, I think, a few weeks short of becoming GDPR compliant. So we should not have any issue here. But those are a few reasons why it is interesting to look into the GDPR compliance now and not wait until we have it right in the face, I think. So now, if we should care, it's like we should ask ourselves, like, what does it mean for my organization? And it's like, basically it means like every organization should look into it, but no organization should spend a fortune in time or money to do so. Every organization should today be able to get an actionable framework around GDPR and assign a team to work on it. And at this point, if we were at this point of time for those organizations, you would have to ask, three first questions. First, what is data governance exactly? Because GDPR revolves around it. And the short of it is data governance is a mix between policies that we set in place and that should map the GDPR policies, processes and tools. So basically, how do I monitor all this? And then people, as in how do I make sure that my actual people enforce this, right? So it's really a mix of responsibility here. Then we should ask, what is personal data really? And personal data is interesting because we always think about the obvious: name, address, social security number, maybe credit card information. We tend not to focus on the less obvious, which is all the unstructured data, like pictures and such, or IP address tracking, which all kinds of respectful marketing departments should do, right? So we all have some kind of personal data we kind of wish we didn't have for the regard of GDPR compliance, and we have to make sure that we understand that all of this are personal data. And once we understand that, we have to recap again, what are the 4 pillars of the directive? How am I going to set up my GDPR journey? And the answer is set it up around 4 pillars. And you have to look at it as a journey. You look at our organization and you say, how do I discover the data that I have? How do I have a good understanding of the data that I have? Then you have, oh, give me a second here. I think I have, there you go. I had a little bit of echo. Sorry about that. I was not planning on doing this, so I'm going to take back up. Once we understand this, so the 4 pillars, yes, it's a journey, and so it's a so you have to be able to discover the data. You have to be able to work with the data, make sure that that you process it a certain way. You have to be able to secure the data. That's an obvious one, and you have to be able to report on the data. And this is important. GDPR regulations says if a user requests that his data be deleted from your environment, you need to be able to do it. But you need to be able to prove that there is no more traces of this customer's data within your network. And that makes it a little bit harder. And that is why you have to put that journey this way, right? And once we have all this under the belt, what we can do is ask a few questions. Where am I today? Should I do an assessment to kind of figure out, am I remotely well set up? Am I completely all over the board? Or on the contrary, do I have actually a proper structure? Where are we? Then, once you know where we are, we obviously know that we want to go to GDPR compliance. So the question becomes, who will be responsible to make sure the organization is compliant in the future? And the last question is key. Ultimately, who will be responsible is key. It's not going to be one person. It's not going to be one department. It's going to be a collective effort. It's an organization-wide project. In there, you're going to have operations. You're going to have IT for the tools, that is for sure, and we're going to review this later. And you're going to have some kind of HR for policies and training folks to make sure that once we have regulation and policies in place, we follow through and work around with them and not around them. And so at this point, this is basically what it means for the organization to go into this journey. So this organization-wide project, it may look like a lot, but there is a lot of existing help out there and also a lot of structure to help you get there. And speaking of help, we're going to go into Microsoft because this webinar is around GDPR hacks around Office 365. So why do we put Microsoft in there? And that may actually sound like a joke, but actually Microsoft's been doing a lot to prep the market to GDPR. Not because they're the friendliest company on the planet, but because they're shifting their business model to the cloud, and they are more and more liable for the data that resides on their infrastructure, be it Office 365 or Azure or something else. So they need to be GDPR compliant. And so they have built their platform, and they are happy to share this platform with their clients, because the more healthy their clients are regarding their compliance and everything, the more they know they're not at risk of breaking their compliance. So they are basically getting us ready to get there. And so if you think about the tools and the platforms Microsoft has, should I say has? Yes. You already know what the platforms are. We're talking about Office 365, Dynamics 365, EMS and Azure, yes. And those platforms have been programmatically created from years back, basically, to tackle basically any type of regulation that would come their way. On the base layer, they have structured those tools so that they can capture all this information and be routed in certain ways, so we can discover them, work with them in a secure manner, secure them some more if we need to for different layers of compliance, or then report on it. It's true all across the board. And they did not do this once again because they're the kindest of the kindest. They mainly did it because they wanted the government business. And as you all know, the government requires about 50 different forms of certifications. But this is why they're ready. And the one tool you may not actually know yet because it just came out, it's called the Microsoft Compliance Manager. And we have a visual there on the side. And James is going to talk to it in a minute. But Compliance Manager is basically all the best practices and the tool and framework Microsoft worked on to get themselves compliant that they're today basically giving to the market. And I'm saying giving because for the time being it is still free, so that all the users, all the clients can actually facilitate their GDPR journey. So James will showcase the Compliance Manager. He will also showcase the security tools embedded within Office 365. We could do it for Dynamics, we could do it for AMS, we could do it for Azure. We're going to focus on Office 365 mainly. Whether or not you're vested in being compliant with GDPR, those security tools are still extremely relevant. So James will tackle this. Next slide. What do we have here? It's the breakdown of the products with Microsoft. So if you want to dive more into those products, this is what you have in terms of security features that we can look into. And that all ties back to security and compliance. We're going to look at a few. You have some that are bolded here, so we're going to look at those. We can look into many others, but we don't have time. If you do find some here that you would absolutely want to look into, once again, I'd like to repeat myself, let us know, and we can do something private in the next date. On the side of this slide, you have a diagram that breaks down all those security features and components into the 4 pillars we've been talking about that map out to the GDPR compliance. I would argue one last thing on this slide is that I would bet that most companies already are paying for some of those tools because they're embedded within the Office 365 bundles, and maybe not all realize that they have them. So the question is, do you pay for that? Did you implement it to GDPR compliance issues? So need to be. And so on the next slide, we just put a breakdown of those features into the different plans. You will have the slides, so you will be able to click on that little link here. It'll give you the breakdown of what plans have what. Also, you should know in there that you will have some of those features that, like Exchange ATP, for example, come in add-ons. So we can review this together and let you know if you're really interested in a specific plan or something like this. We can review, help you figure out if you already have it or not. And I think this concludes my part, and I'm going to go and ask Beth to pass on the presenter rights to James so we can do the presentation. Are you guys still here?
Good morning, good afternoon, and for some of you who are still up late, good evening. So I'm James Williams, Cloud Architect for Crayon. I want to walk you through a few things in Office 365 that will help you drive more value out of your current investment and also align to GDPR. So as JB was saying, GDPR is a very fundamental way, it's a very fundamental change to how we're going to store data from now on. We, as Crayon looks at GDPR, we look at it and say, today it's Europe. But there are all sorts of other countries looking at this. There are all sorts of other areas. Canada's looking at it. There are thoughts that the US may look at it as well. So how do we become prepared? So as we look into my test desktop, and you'll notice that I'm logged in as my friend Karen, who's my favorite test user, we're going to experience some of the features in Office 365 that help us look at GDPR. So let's start with the basics. 12 months ago, I was an IT director, a lot like some of you. I didn't know what GDPR was. And so I needed a way, you know, in that role, I would need a way to begin getting my organization compliant. This is where I would go. Compliance Manager is a wonderful tool. So by default, you get 5 different assessments. You get Office 365's GDPR compliance. You also get NIST 800, which is a federal standard, and you get ISO 2701, which is another federal standard. These are 3 Office 365 elements that require customer managed actions. So you'll see right here, 7 of 61 items have been taken care of. I was messing with this yesterday. Microsoft's side of the equation has already been spoken for. So we'll drill in here and just walk through GDPR. So the thing that I like about Compliance Manager is it really gives you that one bite at a time way to eat the elephant. It breaks it down for you, it groups things, and then it allows you to make progress at your own pace. Because GDPR compliance is not going to be something you buy. It's not going to be something you do once. It will be a discipline. It'll be part of your organization's compliance lifecycle. So let's just go into rights of individuals. We'll drill into this. And so you can see that the way Compliance Manager is broken down, you get each control, each article, and it's broken out into text so that you can read it. It's more or less legible as far as lawyers are concerned. You get a compliance score, which is important to me because it allows me to do prioritization. You get some relatability, and I'll walk through that in a minute. You get the ability to assign users. You get the ability to track this. So this really becomes partly a, how do I generate my to-do list? How do I know what my team has to do? How do I know who's responsible for it? But the other piece of it is that if you come back up here and say export to Excel, all of a sudden I get a readout that I can hand to an auditor and say, this is our compliance position. So let's look at it here. One of the other features I'll draw your attention to just real quickly is on the customer actions, you have the ability to enter text here. So now obviously you're going to enter better text than I do, but this is a demo and so I'm off the hook. So I've got a task here that's assigned to, I can't remember who I assigned it to. We're going to assign it to somebody else. We're going to assign it to our CEO, Dan, and we're going to make it Dan's top priority. Oh, I had it to Carlos. Hey, Dan. All right. So something has gone wrong, probably because we failed the test. We thought we had it implemented. You can see right here, I have an implementation status. We had it implemented. We're going to bump that back to planned. So as we walk through here, you're going to see some of these values change, and I'll walk you through how that works. I'll come back to that. All right, so let's say now we passed through the plan. We're going to re-implement that. The date box comes up. We implemented it today. We tested it. Yeah, come on. We'll test it today too. And we passed. So a couple of things are going to happen that you're going to notice. So one, as we manipulate these controls, you'll see that the one below it was the same, still is the same. So because these controls are related, as you change one related control, they're all going to change. So you get the ability to see GDPR in pieces, and so you can eat it one bite at a time. Is my favorite way to say that. You'll hear it over and over again. But you also get the ability to consume it as kind of a group. So as we scroll down here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, and 8. So as we look at this control ID, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8 are all going to be related, and they're all going to have the same status. Here's number 6. Obviously, 6 doesn't have the same status because it's not related. So as we talk through this, the example that I give folks with GDPR is the thing that GDPR, the use case for GDPR is, as a European national, I can come to your company and say, I don't want to do business anymore with you, erase me from your database, and you have to do it. That means that you have to find it, you have to delete it, you have to make sure that it hasn't gone outside your organization, and then you have to prove it. Those are kind of the 4 steps. They line up to the 4 pillars that JB talked about earlier. So as we talk about this and we look at these related controls, so right here, A724, mechanism to modify or withdraw consent. That's what I just said, right? If I've asked you to remove me from your database, then obviously I no longer consent to you having that. I've stated that explicitly. So that's one piece of this related control. And then secondly, we come down here to correction or erasure. So if I've asked you to delete me, you have to delete me. So that's how this relationship works, is these are pieces along that same trajectory. You'll find in GDPR there are a couple of these little use cases that are easy to get a handle on. So I'm going to drill down now into the security piece of Compliance Manager and just look at some of the higher level compliance scores, right? Securing application services on public networks. A lot of what we do in the GDPR compliance space is what I would consider a more traditional InfoSec. That's a foundational element for GDPR. We build our GDPR compliance on top of those traditional security measures. One of the other ones, there's a big one right down here, protection of records. Do you have something in place to protect your records? This is a very broad control, but again, as you can see, it's got a compliance score of 10, you don't get any higher. So Compliance Manager really helps you drill in, see where your organization needs to improve, shore up those gaps, and then show it. So this is a huge first step as you start down your path of GDPR compliance. Now, as we talk a little about the technology stack, let's walk over to, we're going to walk into production. So these are some Office 365 tools that we'll use to help keep you safe. So as you can see here, I've got some sales data. It's got credit card numbers in it. It's probably nothing I should ever send to anyone. So of course, since I'm the demo guy, I'm going to send it to everybody. So Bob H at Prosware, my buddy Bob over at Prosware, credit cards. Hey Bob, these are the credit cards you asked for. We'll attach that reseller's 8-week sales report. Off it goes. At the same time, my CEO Dan, who we just applied that action item to, has been asking for some information on our pre-sales. So let me grab the pre-sales M400 report, new platform. So you can see Outlook has already blocked this. So Outlook says, oops, check your attachment. You may be sharing something you shouldn't. Dan Jump is not authorized to see this type of information. So when I open it up, I've already told the user, no, you can't do that, because this is chock full of credit card information. So what we do in a GDPR environment is we look at DLP as the firewall for information, right? In a network security mode, your firewall is your network edge. It protects everything inside of it. It's not the only piece of software or hardware that you use to protect your network, but it's definitely the edge. For us, DLP becomes that edge. We make sure that the information that traverses your boundaries is legitimate and that it doesn't have PII in it. This is configurable, so I'm going to go ahead and send it, and it actually won't even let me send. Because of how I've got Karen set up, she can override it. So she has a business justification I really want to send. So now I've sent an override. Now I'm logged, I'm audited. That information has actually gone. So you can see I sent it to Bob and I sent it to Dan. I should also be getting an email back in the next minute or two that says, hey, you can't send that to Bob either. That just has to bounce off the internet before it gets back. Let's see if it's coming in yet. Nope, we'll come back to it. You'll see it come in. Yep, there it is. Right on time. So you can see this is the email to Bob. Oh, nope, that's the one to Dan. We'll get another one for Bob in a minute. You can see even though I overwrote it, it's still coming back. So DLP obviously is a pretty powerful way. This is part of the base O365 package, so we're able to configure this on just about anybody's system. So from a policy standpoint, I just want to show you what's involved in some of these, and then we'll get into kind of the next iteration of this. So as we create these policies, Microsoft has some templates. We give it a name. We have the option to block in specific locations. So I can block Exchange and SharePoint and OneDrive separately. I can get in and include and exclude certain places so that I can apply different compliance settings to different teams of people. If you have teams of people that interact with vendors all day and you need a very high level of DLP around them, then you can do that. If you have office workers that very rarely send confidential information, you could put a different level of DLP. Every organization is a little bit different. Policy information. Let's find some things to block. Microsoft has already established all of these sensitive information types. And so as we look through here, you have all of these. So depending on where these are canned content. Microsoft makes them. You can also create your own. So let's see, credit card number, it's right here. You can see Canadian passport number, just in case you're Canadian. I might be, if you can read what the flag is over my shoulder. Your German passport number, your IP address. So maybe I block data that has IP addresses in it because IP addresses are personally identifiable information. So a lot of these are just pretty expected. Social security number, driver's license number, bank account number. Okay, we'll add that. Okay, so these are the types of content that I'm protecting. So I'm going to save that. And I can detect when it's shared with just people inside my organization or with people outside my organization, or we can get a little more advanced. I'm just going to take that for right now. We have the ability to show policy tips. You saw that tip that popped up. We can control where the thresholds are, whether you get a notification at 1 or whether you get a notification at 10. There's all sorts of things you can do here. So we'll go. And this is the key right here. This is the most important part of DLP. You get the chance to test it first. Let's put it in place. Let's show the users what is and what isn't important, and then let's turn it on later. So this gives you the ability to step into DLP without just turning it on and hoping that it works. Super critical as we talk about how to responsibly implement some of the GDPR controls. You can make a mess if you don't do it well. All right, so that'll take just a second to finish up. One of the other things I want to talk about real quick is the next step. So DLP begins that discussion of setting up a perimeter. The next step on there is information protection. It's information classification and just making sure that people have the right levels of access to the right data. So as we look here, we have, oh, that's the wrong example. Let's go in here and look at OneDrive. So in my OneDrive, you can see that I have lots of different files. And so we're going to go ahead and look at this M400 report. So I've got a sensitivity. My sensitivity allows me to put a tag on this that says, this is how my organization deals with this information. Is it personal? Does it just belong to me? Is it public? Can I send it to anybody? And I can then tie technology around these basic sensitivities. So I can see this is confidential. So I worked for a customer a couple of years ago who had their entire board of directors data on a common file share. Anybody who knew where that data was could go read the notes from the board of directors meetings. That's not good, right? That's highly confidential information. So this gives me the ability to say this is highly confidential. Finance is the only team that can see this, right? And this is all configured by the administrator on the back end. You can see while I've been talking, Excel has realized what's up, and it says a policy hit. Do not do this again. It will not end well for you. I wrote that yesterday. It will now no longer allow me to autosave. I can't do things with this. So in order to resolve, it tells you right here, this file contains credit card numbers. You can't do anything. You can't send it. You can't save it. Won't allow it. The other piece that's really important here is that if you back out here, sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't. There will be a no-go, a do not disturb type icon on the actual file itself to say, hey, this has been classified. So as we go up, we start with DLP. We talk about information protection, which is built into Office 365. You take it to the next step. Now you're talking about Azure information protection, which is on the E3 and E5 end. So depending on where you are consuming Office 365 and Azure, you can leverage that differently. But when you get into Azure Information Protection, they actually have features that will walk through your file shares, go all the way top to bottom and look at all your files and then classify them for you. So you can actually do this and roll it into your environment a piece at a time. So that's what I've got to show you guys today. We've still got about 15-20 minutes to take questions. But again, it's really critical that folks understand that this is a fundamental shift in the way that we handle data. It's going to take a long time to get into. We're on just the tip of the iceberg right now. So Tony Muslak, one of my other cloud BDMs, has been working on GDPR at a glance. So in the news and information on our website, you go to Crayon US. I have it bookmarked conveniently. So in here we have GDPR at a glance, and what Tony's been doing is every day, every week, he goes through and he takes one article of the GDPR regulations. It's 88 pages. I saw it the other day. It's like that thick. 88 pages of documentation, and he goes one article a day and he turns it into English. And if this is your first trip into GDPR, you need that help. I know I did. So there's also in those links, there'll be a GDPR assessment that it's a questionnaire that will help you. Yeah, Tony's on the chat, so go ahead and ask him your questions, y'all, because the expert is here. There's also a GDPR questionnaire that'll help you with that first initial assessment of, okay, where am I kind of in the GDPR journey. So thanks for the time. JB, back to you, man.
Thank you. So I will get the presenter rights in a second again. I think.
Yep, just a moment.
There you go, monitor. Thank you, James. I think we're back on. Let me check real quick. Yes. So thank you for that. I know for the audience, it was you know, a lot of information. There's a lot to cover. So once again, if we need more details, we're happy to do that. Beth has added in the chat the link to the GDPR note that Tony Muslak's been writing. So if you want to go on there and check it out and capture that link for later, that's perfect. We have a few more slides that we want to go through, but we're almost done, and we'll go to questions. One of the slides we wanted to, one of the questions we wanted to ask is like, when you're going to go into this journey, do you do it yourself or do you get help? And that's a legitimate question. And so what we did, we placed all those modules here, the ones that are embedded within the Microsoft suites, but we didn't do two things really. On top of this, you should really have something like, do I do an assessment myself? And do I go through Tony Muslak's news article and try to go and figure it out if I'm good? Or do I basically have someone do an assessment for me? That's a valid question. It all depends on how comfortable you are with doing this. The second topic that is not on this slide is going to be, so once I have everything set up and I start using, say, Azure Compliance Manager, the tool that James showed earlier, when he was writing to those little text box, basically those are a place for policies. Do I need help to write policies for my organizations? Legitimate question as well. It can be hard, it can be simple. And then, of course, if you want to look into the tools that you can leverage to help you for the security aspect of the things, those are parts of the tools you can use on Office 365, EMS, and Azure. And in this case, we have on the diagram here pointed to the easy ones. We think that those ones are no-brainers. You should be able to implement those yourself. Medium and hard really depends on the strength of the IT team and whether or not they have experience, if they want to have more insights into best practices. So really, this is for information only. We can always take questions on the side on this. What else do we have? Yes, if you were to require some help and you wanted to leverage Crayon, I just wanted to give you a quick note on who we are, so we understand who we are. This is the corporate slide, so I'm going to go fast on this, but we're a global player. in the software asset management, software management world. And so we're one of the 10 largest Microsoft partner in the world. So just to give you an idea of the shape of the company, the key pillars that we have are software asset management, services, and licensing. There's about 1,200 employees, and we follow our mission is SAM first, cloud first. So this is who we are in a nutshell. If I go into the model that we follow, the kind of the process we follow to help our clients reach, optimum agreement structure, compliance, and so on and so forth, the process we follow is always the same thing. We work into right sizing and tailor making. Once we do this, because we have deep understanding of the compliance regulations and the licensing aspect of everything, we're able to optimize the cost and reduce completely the risks of audits and other type of issues. The one last thing we take into consideration is the kind of a long-term journey that the client wants to take. And if they want to go to the cloud, there are a few steps that we need to keep in mind so that we can help them facilitate their cloud adoption. And to the simple question, why would you go and work with Crayon? Crayon is one of the largest software asset management player in the world. Compliance is really in our DNA. And GDPR is a topic we have invested in for about 20 months now to get the group at an international level compliant. And so our consultants have been feeding on that internal project so that it would be ahead of the curve and able to deliver after that the right consulting services around the topic. So if any reason, experience would be one. And that's all I'm going to say about Crayon, and we are going to take questions. So Beth, I think you need to get off of mute and share with us.
Yes, okay, we had a few questions come in. All right, the first question, can I fulfill all of the GDPR requirements with Office 365?
Okay, so I think I can take this one. The answer is probably not, although one would argue that if the workflow of the company is based around Office 365, SharePoint, and we're a full Microsoft-centric company, it could certainly help. So the short answer would be probably not, but it would be a good start.
Okay, great. Okay, and then we'll jump to another question. Does Compliance Manager only support the cloud, or does it support on-prem data as well?
So, James,
I can hop in on that one if you want, Bethany.
Yep.
Absolutely. So Compliance Manager is targeted specifically, it is targeted at Office 365. There are pieces of that that are very organization specific, so it won't necessarily be just the practices that you develop as you're doing that will not be just for Office 365. But yeah, Compliance Manager is built with an eye towards the Microsoft stack. So we have some GDPR assessment tools that we can work with you to do some kind of on-prem different scenarios. So we've got the full offering. The Compliance Manager kind of built-in tool is just for Microsoft, or is targeted mainly at Microsoft is probably the best way to put it.
And I would argue this is a valid point. In the end, what you're going to see is that you're going to have everything Microsoft centric you can tackle with Compliance Manager. But Compliance Manager is a framework that has been built for Microsoft around GDPR, and this can easily be translated into different type of editors. And if you go and see, for example, for Salesforce.com, many of you may have that. They should have something that helps you the same way as Compliance Manager would. And if you're able to articulate what you have done at Microsoft, most likely they would be able to get you in the same disposition within those applications as well. And this is true for many other.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that's all the questions we have. So thank you for coming, and please reach out to anyone at Crayon if you'd like to go through a free GDPR assessment or learn more about getting ready for GDPR. So that's all we have for you guys.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being on the wire today. Talk to you next time.
Okay, bye.